March. Looking at the screen here with the Dow down 522 points, I do just want to point out that the volatility or fear index is spiking about 15%. It is now above 20 to the upside, rather, above 20. So we're looking at the moment at a decent fear here. But as we look at this, we also have to take into account the fact that President Trump is about to turn his focus to trade once again. Now, he had this weekend visit to Europe to commemorate Armistice Day. Of course, the end of World War I. It had its moments of tension between him and some of the world leaders. But now the real strain might begin because the EU and the U.S. still have not resolved their tariff tiff. EU Trade Chief Cecilia Malmström is U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer will come face-to-face for talks in Washington. This is on Wednesday. According to officials, there is hope for what's called early harvest. An early harvest agreement is a way to kind of move along trade talks and stave off higher U.S. car duties. Early harvest is a trade term, in case you don't know it, for some sort of deal being wrought at the start of negotiations in order to smooth the way for a larger framework. David O'Sullivan is the EU ambassador to the U.S. here in a Fox Business exclusive from D.C., actually. Ambassador, let's get right to it. Remember this July when President Trump and the EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker burst out of the White House after huddling for hours, and they promised that they'd negotiate in order to avert U.S. auto tariffs. That moment at those two podiums was 4 months ago. Where do the two sides really stand today?
Well, I think we've had some very, very good discussions, both at working level and at the chief negotiator level. Bob Lighthizer and Cecilia Malmström met a couple of weeks ago. We had a very large delegation of Commission negotiators, particularly on the regulatory aspects, in D.C. 2 weeks ago. And Cecilia Malmström will be here on Wednesday, as you said, to continue those talks with Ambassador Lighthizer. So we've been working hard on the four pillars of that agreement reached between President Trump and President Juncker. Talks about a possible industrial free trade agreement, work on regulatory matters, work on LNG exports and soya exports, which have been increasing considerably, and joint work on how to reform the WTO. So the talks are progressing very well.
Okay, I'm getting a better feeling hearing this from you, but then you start to hear about the concern regarding the auto tariffs. Jean-Claude Juncker was saying that the auto tariffs and the reprieve from them that President Trump granted the European Union actually expire. They'll be done pretty much by the end of the year. And therefore, beyond that, if there isn't a deal, the 25% tax or tariff on foreign cars, European cars coming into the U.S. would have an average of what, around $11,300 added to each European-made car coming into the U.S. That is going to freeze up the entire industry, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, you're running a little ahead of things there, Liz. We haven't even seen the report of the Department of Commerce, which is the next step following the investigation which took place. And then, of course, the president will have to assess that and see what options it proposes and what he wants to do. We've been very clear. We don't think that there is a justification for using the national security exception to the WTO rules in the case of autos. And also the agreement between President Trump and President Juncker was very clear. Both sides have agreed not to introduce any new tariff restrictions to our trade as long as these talks are continuing. And we believe the talks are going well, and therefore we would be very surprised if there was any talk of new additional tariffs at this point.
Okay, I know I push forward, but listen, the end of the year is just around the corner.
But that's not really a deadline. I mean, there's no deadline of the end of the year. So you know, we will move these talks as quickly as we can. But we're trying to make as much progress as is possible on some fairly complex issues. But we're moving forward.
I'll tell you where there is a major hard deadline, and that's March 29th for Brexit, the big divorce pact between the UK, and the European Union. I just want your thoughts on this because there is some news on this. The talks had gone over, I believe, at 2:45 a.m. this morning. So there is discussion. The pipeline is working both ways where they are talking. But Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London, had put out an op-ed today in the Telegraph newspaper. And in it, this was a little bit of a strong language. What a shock that Boris Johnson is a little hyperbolic here. But he said, the UK has become the punk of Brussels. We've agreed to become the punk of Brussels, signing up not just for their existing rule book, but to huge chunks of future regulation in order to keep that border between Ireland, an EU country, and Northern Ireland, a UK country, keep that border open and soft so that goods can travel back and forth. Obviously, a hard border would be horrible. It would take too much time to clear goods and things like that if suddenly that became a closed border. But where do you think that stands?
Well, I just, to be clear on one point, Liz, I think the issue of a hard border on the island of Ireland is not so much about, slowing down goods. It's about the peace process. It's about the enormous achievement of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, which brought peace and tranquility to Northern Ireland. And all people involved, the British government, the Irish government and the people of Northern Ireland, I think, fear that the introduction of hard border infrastructure with police posts and checks could give rise to difficulties.
Boris isn't thinking about that. Boris is thinking about, we're now punks for giving in too much just to have an open border with Ireland.
Well, I don't know if Mr. Johnson knows exactly what's been agreed or what's under discussion. The issue here is we hope to solve the issue of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in the context of the future trading relations. But that's something which can't be decided immediately. And as you say, there's a hard deadline. We need to agree a withdrawal agreement by the end of March. So what is under discussion is how to have a kind of insurance policy to make sure that under no circumstances there will be a return to a hard border. But that insurance policy may never be needed if the problem can be resolved in the coming years through the negotiations for a future trading relationship. And that's yet to be defined and yet to be decided. And I think so we're working on completing the withdrawal agreement, which are the terms of the UK's departure, and a political declaration of how we will take forward the negotiations on the UK's future relationship with the European Union after they leave at the end of March.
Let's end with the US and the EU. Give me your over-under on whether we will see a good deal, a good, fair deal for both sides. And again, Jean-Claude Juncker and President Trump, I believe, are expected to see each other at the G20.
I think when the two men met here in Washington at the end of July, they struck up a good personal rapport. They've agreed an agenda which, if we can complete it, will deliver good outcomes for both sides. And I'm quite convinced that we will be able to deliver on that agenda to the benefit of both the United States and the European Union.
So good to see you, Ambassador. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador David O'Sullivan, the European Union ambassador to the U.S.